Hello everyone, today is the second episode of the history of Jihad. And we will see how Jihad comes to Spain and India. And to remember, Jihad is the holy war of Islam. It is a religious need, a religious duty, with a religious motive, because it was taught by Muhammad in the Hadith, in the Sunnah, and in the Quran. And we will see the history of jihad in those 1400 years of Muslim history. Spain, 711. Count Julian was a ruler of some of the remaining Christian domains in North Africa, subject to Roderick, the reigning and last Visigothic king of Spain. According to Ibn Abd al-Hakam, Julian was the governor of the straits between this district and Andalus, and also the governor of a town called Alcadra, situated on the same side of the straits of Andalus as Tangiers. Like many, a powerful man presented with a comely intent. However, Roderick had taken advantage of the girl, and she became pregnant by him. When he learned of the violation of his beloved daughter, who became a vivid and controversial figure in Spanish legends under the name of Florinda la Cava, presented variously as a victim, as a seductress, and even as a prostitute, Julian was enraged. He was determined to take revenge upon Roderick. It didn't take him long to come up with a plan. Roderick had destroyed his daughter, so he will destroy Roderick's kingdom. I see for him no other punishment or recompense than that I should bring the Arabs a justice. And so that is how the Arabs arrived to Spain, because of an internal struggle that between the kingdoms, because of the abuse of the daughter of Count Julian. Tarik and his men landed at Niman's Torp, a rock formation at the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula. Ultimately, the conquering Muslims would rename it as Jabal Tarik in his honor, the mountain of Tarik, from which is derived the word Gibraltar. You have heard that in this country there are a large number of ravishingly beautiful Greek maidens. Their graceful forms are draped in sumptuous gowns on which gleam pearls, thorough and purest gold, and they live in the palaces of royal kings. Count Julian's thirst for revenge was not settled by Roderick's death. He went to Tarik and urged him to press on and conquer all of Spain. And the king of the gods is slain. Their princes are fled before you. The army is routed. The nation is astonished. Secure with sufficient detachments, the city of Boetica, both in person and without delay, marched to the royal city of Toledo, and allowed not the distracted Christians either time or tranquility for the election of a new monarch. And Toledo was at that time the capital of Spain. Tarik heeded his advice and marched north, meeting very little resistance and capturing Toledo with relative ease. And so Visigothic Spain collapsed with amazing speed before the invading Muslims. By 718, just 7 years after Tarik and his men burned their boats and determined to take the land for Islam or die, and Spain was almost entirely subdued. And here we have a map of comparison of 644 to 718, and we can see the expansion of Islam on how they took almost all of North Africa and they arrived to Spain, and they were going to the places of the Hindus, and that is how we can see how much it rise, how much it grew in so little time. And so the Reconquista, or the process of reconquering Spain, began. 711 to 1049 which was the year where America was discovered. And so meaning 700 years of resistance against the Muslims. Pelayo, who immediately told the local Muslim overlords that he would not pay the jizya, he established what he called the Kingdom of Asturias and began to attack the Muslim bases in the area. Have you not read in sacred scripture that the church of the Lord is like the mustard seed, which small as it is, grows more than any other through the mercy of God? Our hope is in Christ. This little mountain will be the salvation of Spain and of the people of the gods. The mercy of Christ will free us from that multitude. Meanwhile, the Arabs were trading slaves. The Umayyad Caliphate began large scale of dealing with slaves, requiring not only on physical laborers but set slaves for the harems of the caliphs and other high officials, as well as eunuchs who could be trusted to guard these harems. The warriors of Islam drew these slaves beginning in the 8th century from regular raids in three principal areas: Central Asia, the northern fringes of sub-Saharan Africa, and Central and Southern Europe, which they called Bilad as-Sartilba, as a slave country, and the ethnic designation Slav is derived from the Arabic Satlaf, or slaves. Very interesting. The name of those people in that part of Europe, the Slavs, the origin of their name is actually slave. Now, Paul Lovejoy estimates that around 6 million black slaves were transported across the Sahara between the years 650 to 500, just like like 1,000 years. Incredible, very horrible. Let us remind that not only did Muhammad had slaves, but he also had black slaves, and he had some very ugly comments about the Turks and the Asian people. That is all in the Sunnah. Now, the jihad in India began, and they started by conquering Sindh or Pakistan in 711. My ruling is given: kill anyone belonging to the combatants, arrest their sons and daughters for hostages, and imprison them. Whoever submits, grant them a man or protection, and settle their tribute as Dima. Muslims massacred between 6,000 and 26,000 Sindhis at Brahman Daf, 6,000 more at Rawar, and 4,000 at Istralandar, and 6,000 at Multan. Hindu temples, by contrast, churches and synagogues, were always considered to be centers of idolatry, in which the name of Allah was not mentioned, and consequently they were to be destroyed whenever possible. At Daibul, the Muslims faced a force of 4,000 Rajputs, Indian warriors, and 2 to 3,000 Brahmins, or Hindu priests, defending a Hindu temple. Once victorious, Muhammad ibn Qasim the temple destroyed and the Brahmins entrusted as soon to convert them to Islam. However, seeing that his new converts were resisting, rather than embracing the new religion, he ordered all of them over the age of 17 to be executed. The victorious jihadis began a massacre so intensive that it lasted 3 days. Young women and children were enslaved. At Multan, Muhammad ibn Qasim ordered the destruction of an immense idol made of gold, with eyes of rubies. According to the Shahnama, a 12th century Persian history of the conquest of Sindh that may have been based on an earlier Arabic original, 230 mans of gold were obtained, and 40 jars filled with gold dust. This gold and the image were brought to the treasury together with the gems and pearls and treasures which were obtained from the pardon of Multan. And it also began the jihad in Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. And the second siege of Constantinople occurred in 717, where Maslama, the jihadi commander, was deceived by the Byzantine general Leo the Isaurian, and he burned the Muslims' food supplies, but the Byzantines did not surrender. According to the historian Tabari, during the difficult winter the jihadis camped around Constantinople and ate animals, skin, tree roots, leaves, and indeed everything except dirt. The winter was so severe that Suleiman could not send the Muslim supplies or reinforcement. and on August 570 the Muslims ended the siege. An important battle was the Battle of Tours, 732. It was the battle that saved Europe. It stopped the complete conquest and Islamization of Europe. The warriors of Jihad would appear again in France, but they would not come close again to gaining control of the whole country until many centuries later, by vastly different means. When there was no longer a Charles Martel to stop them, the Muslim warriors had traversed immense distances, and in all of Europe there were in the early 7th century no significant forces that could have stopped them were it not for the Battle of Tours. Interestingly, one 20th century European, however, was disappointed that Charles Martel had defeated the warriors of Islam, for the same reason that Gibbon was relieved. He exclaimed, "Had Charles Martel not been victorious at Poitiers, already, you see, the world had fallen into the hands of the Jews. So godless a thing was Christianity. Then we should in all probability have been converted to Mohammedanism, that cult which glorifies heroism and which opens the seventh heaven to the bold warrior alone. Then the Germanic races would have conquered the world. Christianity alone prevented them from doing so." Who was this 20th century European that said this, that had this admirers for Islam? Exactly. It was the man with the funny mustache, the Austrian painter, everybody. You know his name. Now, the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate in 750. They were finally overthrown by a rival clan and an Islamic revivalist movement, the Abbasids. As they were members of Muhammad's household, descendants of his hunter Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, while the Humayds were the descendants of Abu Sufyan, the Quraysh chieftain who had fought Muhammad at the Battle of Uhud and the Battle of the Trench. And the Abbasids accused the Humayds of being apostates, of innovating the teachings in the Quran and the teaching of the Muhammad. Now, here we have another map where we can see the rise of Islam. The red painting is Islamic world under the regime of Muhammad, where we can see they took Medina, the Mecca, Arabia, Yemen. Then it expanded with the four caliphates. They took Egypt, the Cairo, Jerusalem, Damascus, Syria, Iraq, Baghdad, Iran, Isfahan, Armenia, and so much more. Then the Umayyad caliphates they arrived to Spain, taking Andalusia, Toledo, Córdoba, Tangier, Maghreb, Tunis, and they will later on fight with the islands of Crete and Sicilia, which we will see later. Harun al-Rashid, Abbasid Caliph, 786 to 809. He invaded the Byzantine Empire 8 times. Near Samosata in southeast Anatolia, he ordered all the churches in the area to be destroyed. At Kherson, the Muslims destroyed a magnificent church with 15 altars that was said to have been constructed by the apostles of Christ themselves. They used the stones to build a fortress at the town of Hadad. Taken that he had subjected the Roman Empire, Nicephorus also agreed to not rebuild the fortresses that the Jihadi had destroyed. But once Harun withdrew, he rebuilt them anyway. Harun, hearing of Nicephorus' perfidy, seized the city of Tebasa in Lithuania and the island of Cyprus, where he destroyed all the churches and forcibly resettled the Cypriots elsewhere. And the Jihad began in Crete and Sicily in 825. 10,000 Muslims from Al-Andalus took the sea and began to engage in the Jihad of piracy, raiding infidel ships in search of booty. By 829, the Jihadi invaders had been almost completely driven off of the island when they received unexpected help. An invading Muslim army from Al-Andalus, led by Asbigh ibn Waqil, al-Turk, they ultimately took Palermo, the Muslims were not able to secure the eastern part of Sicily, estimated both by the ferocity of the native population and their own inability to unite their various factions. The fighting went on for decades. In 878, the Muslims finally took Syracuse, and the booty was immense. The plate of the cathedral weighed 5,000 pounds of silver. The entire spoil was computed at 1 million of pieces of gold. Along with the treasure, the Muslims enslaved over 17,000 Christians, who were captured and sent to Africa to lead lives of slavery. When the Muslims took Tarmonia, the warriors of Jihad were finally able to secure complete control of Sicily in 902. And it also began the Jihad in Rome in 846. The basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul, outside of the walls, however, as the latter's name indicated, were outside of the city's defenses, and the jihadis plundered both, taking as much silver and gold as they could, including a sumptuous silver altar from St. Peter's. But finding Rome's walls too strong to breach, they continued down the Appian Way to nearby Fondi, which they plundered, and Gaeta, which they besieged. Although the jihadis had left the immediate vicinity of Rome, the people in the great city were thoroughly alarmed, and so it began a counterattack in 861 to 870. As rival factions bid for power in the mid of the ninth century, the Abbasids were so weakened by the internal divisions that the Byzantines were able to go on the offensive and recapture the provinces of Illyricum, Greece, Bulgaria, northern Syria, Cilicia, and Armenia, which they had previously lost to Jihad. And it also occurred a very important conflict between the Muslims, between the Sunni and the Shias, the Cromartians versus the Abbasid. In 928, the Cromartians struck their mightiest blow yet against Abbasid power. They stormed Mecca and stole the Black Stone from the Kaaba, carrying what they considered a focus of idolatry back to Bahrain. The theft of the Black Stone signified, the Cromartians said, the end of Islam and the commencement of the age of the Mahdi. They were, however, willing to return it for a ransom back to Mecca, but the Abbasids never made any effort to pay up. Finally, in 950, on the orders of the Fatimid Shia Caliphate, who had established himself in Cairo and whose authority they had accepted, the Cromartians threw the Black Stone into the great mosque of Kufa in central Iraq, along with a note saying, "By command we took it, and by command we have brought it back." It had been in three pieces when it was taken, perhaps from the impact of being thrown into the mosque. It had now broken into seven. And there you can see what is remaining of the Kaaba, of the Black Stone that the Muslims kiss and all of that. And jihad continues, the jihad in Spain and in Asia. And now we will see the figure of the Cid, a Cantar of Mio Cid, a very famous poem. Now, in Spain, there was the Emirate of Córdoba, where first the Emirate of the Umayyad Caliphate, that we already seen, the Umayyad Caliphate, then the Emirate of Córdoba, and then the Caliphate of Córdoba, and then many reigns of Muslim reigns that will appear later. Now, the Umayyad laws were designed to emphasize that Muslims had the dominant position in society, and that the Christians of Spain were decidedly inferior. It was made unpleasant, expensive, and dangerous to live daily life as a Christian, so that the victory and supremacy of Islam was readily observable and regularly reinforced. Timid Christians also knew that all they had to do to end this daily discrimination and sporadic harassment and persecution was to convert to Islam, and many did convert. Because it was miserable to live as a Christian in Andalus, Christians could never be sure that they would not be aroused. One contemporary account tells of priests being pelted with rocks and dung by Muslims while on the way to a cemetery. The Dhimmis also suffered severe economic hardship. Paul Arborus, a 9th-century Christian in Córdoba, complained about the unbearable tax that Muslims levied on Christians. Let us, let us let us remember that all of this teaching, all of this occurrence, all of this oppression against the unbelievers comes from the Quran from the Surah 900 no yes 929, which is the ayah of the sword of the Jihad, and it's also in the Sunnah that Muslims have to engage in Jihad and they have to submit and humiliate unbelievers. Christian and Muslim sources contain numerous records of similar incidents in the early part of the 10th century. Around 910, in one of many such episodes, a woman was executed for proclaiming that Jesus was God and that Muhammad had lied to his followers. Abdul ar-Rahman III, the last ruler of the Emirate of Córdoba, was a tyrant. He was no more merciful towards his own people. According to Ibn Hayyan, I must also mention a horror with which An-Nasir terrorized people, which was by means of lions to make their punishment even more terrible, an action more proper of the tyrannical kings of the Orient, in which he imitated them, having the lions brought to him by the little kings on the North African coast, since they are not animals proper to Andalus. Abdul ar-Rahman an-Nasir was not far from his great-grandfather Al-Hakam Hisam, in the way he threw himself into sin and committed doubtful acts, abusing his subjects, giving himself cynically to pressure, punishing with cruelty and caring little for diffusion of blood. The Caliphate of Córdoba came to an end in 10,031, as the last Umayyad Caliph, Hisham III, was imprisoned and exiled, and the Muslim chieftains who ruled the various regions of Muslim Spain could not agree on a successor. Al-Andalus henceforth became a collection of small Muslim emperors and emirates and fiefdoms. In the earlier 1060s, King Fernando I of Leon won a series of victories over the four most important of these small Muslim states, or taifas: Zaragoza, Toledo, Badajoz, and Valencia. In a turnabout of the jizya, he forced them to pay tribute. In 1064, he successfully laid siege to the fortress city of Coimbra and freed most of Portugal from Islamic rule. Now, this is very important to remind of. This is the pogrom Granada Jewish Massacre, or the Genocide of Granada, that happened in 1066. A Jew named Samuel ibn Agrila gained the trust of the Muslim rulers and was granted political power in Granada. Later, Samuel's son Joseph also held positions of great honor and responsibility. Now, in this genocide, 4,000 Jews were massacred, women, men, and children. Let us remind us that many of the things we will hear right now, they have an origin in the Surah of Muhammad, in the Hadiths, and in the Quran. Well, let us continue. The Muslim jurist Abu Ishaq composed verses addressed to the Berber king Badis that vividly demonstrated the Muslim conviction that Muslims must enjoy a place superior to that of the dhimmis, who must endure a state of humiliation. Of Granada Muslim ruler Abu Ishaq wrote the following: "He has chosen an infidel as his secretary, when he could had wished have chosen a believer. Through him the Jews have become great and proud and arrogant, they who were among the most abject, and have gained their desires and attained the utmost, and this happened suddenly, before they even realized. And how many a worthy Muslim humbly obeys the vilest ape among these miscreants." Let us remind that that insult comes from the Quran, and this did not happen through their own efforts, but throughout one of our own people who rose as their accomplice. On why did he not deal with them, following the example set by worthy and pious leaders, put them back where they belong, and reduce them to the lowest of the low? Turn your eyes to other countries, and you will find the Jews are outcast dogs. Why should you alone be different and bring them near, when in all of the land they are kept afar? I came to live in Granada, and I saw them throttling there. They divided the city and the provinces, with one of their accursed men everywhere. They collect all the revenues, they munch and they crunch. They dressed in the finest clothes, while you wear the meanest. They are the trustees of your secrets, yet how can traitors be trusted? Hasten to slaughter them as an offering. Sacrifice them, for for this is a precious thing. Do not consider it a breach of faith to kill them. The breach of faith would be to let them carry on and live. 4,000 Jews were killed in Granada. And here we have Rodrigo Diaz, or El Cid, with a very famous poem, El Cantar of Mio Cid. You probably have heard of it. It's very important in the Spanish literature. Now, he lived in the 1048 to 1099. Alfonso VI was thus determined. Even in defeat, in the wake of the disaster, he sent out appeals for help to Christian leaders all over Spain and France, warning them that the Almoravid advance deeply endangered Christianity in Spain, and asking them to come to join him in the defense of Christendom. When he received Alfonso VI's appeal, he returned and again took up the struggle against the Almoravids, and he took the city of Valencia from the Muslims. And in 1097, he defeated the jihadists decisively at Bahrain, near Gandia in southeast Spain. You can see the map there. Now, in 1099, the Christians of Spain controlled two-thirds of the Iberian Peninsula. The momentum of the Jihad had been decisively broken, and the impetus for more initiatives against the Muslims came continuously from the systematic mistreatment of the Christians who still lived in the Islamic domains. And the, and the Arab slave market continued. A 12th century witness of the sale of set slaves described the market. The merchant tells the slave girls to act in a coquettish manner with the old men and with the timid men, among the potential buyers to make them crazy with desire. The merchant paints red the tips of the fingers of a white slave. He paints in gold those of a black slave, and he dresses them all in transparent clothes, the white female slaves in pink and the black ones in yellow and red. And so the jihad continued against India. Mahmud of Ghazni, 971 to 1030. The 13th century Muslim historian Minik al-Siraj Juzjani, author of the Tabakat al-Nasiri, a historian of Islam writes, noted that as Mahmud waged jihad in India, he converted so many thousands of indoor temples into masjidis or mosques. Mahmud brought the idol whenever he could, so as to demonstrate the power of Islam and the superiority of Allah to the gods of the other people of India. When he defeated the Hindu ruler Raja Jaipal in 1001, he had Jaipal paraded about in the streets so that his sons and chieftains might see him in that condition of shame, bonds, and disgrace, and that the fear of Islam might fly abroad through the country of the infidels. And here we have another map of the Islamic world in the year 1000, where they have Spain, Cordoba, Morocco, North Africa, Alexandria, Egypt, Syria. They are taking Armenia, and they are almost in the heart of the Christian Empire. They are very close to Constantinople. Now, continuing with India. The historian Al-Utbi boasted that Mahmud purified India from idolatry and raised mosques therein. But the Sultan wasn't finished. In 1013, he marched with a large jihadi army toward Lahore, the capital of Hindustan, where he found a Buddhist temple. Inside the temple was a stone bearing an inscription saying, according to Al-Utbi, that the temple had been founded 50,000 years ago. and Mahmud of Ghazni was surprised at the ignorance of these people, because those who believe in the true faith know that only 7,000 years have elapsed since the creation of the world. Mahmud and his men went on to Nandana, the capital of the Kabul Charni kingdom under the king Anandapur. Here again, the jihadis slaughtered the population indiscriminately and destroyed the temples, all could be recounted. The Sultan returned in the rear of immense beauty, and slaves were so plentiful that they became very cheap, and the men of respectability in their native land were degraded by becoming slaves of common shopkeepers. But such is the goodness of Allah, who bestows honor on his own religion and degrades infidelity. 5 years later, Mahmud entered Hindustan again and marched toward the fortress of Mahmud. Al-Utbi said that the infidels deserted the fort and tried to cross the foaming river, but many of them were slain, taken or drowned. Nearly 50,000 men were killed. Then at Mathura, Al-Hudbi added that the Sultan gave orders that all the temples should be burned with naphtha and fire, and leveled with the ground. At Tanuk, the Muslim historian continued, there were nearly 10,000 temples. Many of the inhabitants of the place fled in consequence of witnessing the fate of their deaf and dumb idols. Those who did not fly were put to death. The Sultan gave his soldiers leave to plunder and take prisoners. Ghazni was filled with stolen Indian goods that the jihadis had appropriated, and even though the Muslims killed 50,000 people at Somnath, Hindu slaves were again so plentiful that they sold as little as 2 or 3 dirhams. Now the conquest of Armenia, once again. The warriors of Jihad were only too happy to exploit all of this internal dissension among the Christians, noted Lastevirsky. As soon as the Persians realized that the Byzantines were fighting and opposing one another, they boldly arose and came against us, ceaselessly raiding, destructively ravaging. By Persians, he was referring to the Seljuk Turks. In 1048, they seized the Armenian city of Arsten. According to Matthew of Edessa, a 12th century Armenian chronicle, the rampaging jihadis killed 150,000 people, and Matthew lamented, the sons taken into slavery, the infants smashed without mercy against the rock, the venerable old men abashed in public squares, the gentle born virgins dishonored and carried off. 13th century Muslims, historian Sibit ibn al-Jasri, recounted the testimony of a night witness. The army entered the city, massacred its inhabitants, pillaged and burned it, leaving it ruins and taking prisoners all those who have remained alive. The dead bodies were so many that they blocked the streets. One could not go anywhere without stepping over them, and the number of prisoners was not less than 50,000 souls, and I was determined to enter the city and see the destruction with my own eyes. And I tried to find a street in which I would not have to walk over the corpses, but that was impossible. And Jerusalem was taken in 1077. The jihadis had entered the city and they murdered 3,000 people.